This is Rough Drafts Welcome,
the podcast where you can mess up, and we can too.
I'm Sachiko.
And I'm Erin.
And together with the editors at Salt and Sage Books,
we're changing the face of storytelling, one rough draft at a time.
We're glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Rough Drafts Welcome. I'm glad that you are here. Thank you for tuning in. I'm sure you can hear I have a little bit of extra grit in my voice today. We are fighting off COVID at our house again. Favorite thing in the world. Please wear masks in public. My goodness. All right, today our episode is going to be about reading and editing specifically for your friends. So in this episode, I intend to speak directly to writers who are kind of at the beginning stage. But if you are looking for a broader critique group, I think this discussion can also be helpful. I do find earlier writers typically tend to be the ones who want to engage in this, but writers of all shapes and sizes are editing for their friends all across the board. So a little bit of backstory on this. My critique partner, who I currently have, actually started as a critique partner, and then we became friends. And I have had critique partners in the past where we began as friends, and then our relationship turned a little more focused on the critique, and we had more of a professional relationship. And I've also had people who I started as friends with. We read for each other, and we are still primarily friends. So there are a lot of different ways that this can go. I also think it's important to point out that for me, and in my experience, in order to be a really good writer, I do think you need some editorial skills. This is not to say that you cannot write if you don't know how to edit, but it is absolutely to say that there is no such thing as a perfect first draft. And if you intend to pursue any amount of publication, you are going to have so many revisions that you are going to want to rip your book in half sometimes. Ask me how I know. So being able to look at your piece and work through editing it, especially on your own, is a skill that will come in handy for you. So I think it's a skill that is incredibly worth developing, especially if you have long-term goals in the publishing industry or in writing anything, or honestly, in being creative across the board. If you hone your own abilities to edit, it is only going to improve your writing. Now, I do not think that it is necessarily true that to be a good editor, you also have to be a good writer. That has not been my experience. I know several people, and some of them work for Salt and Sage actually, who do not have any desire to write their own books, but instead are just really gifted at editing. They understand story, they understand the format, they understand language, they understand grammar. You do not have to be a writer in order to be an incredible editor. And it's probably true for the opposite as well, that you do not have to be an incredible editor in order to be a good writer, but incredible editing does need to happen at some point in your process. So whether you are learning to be that editor or whether you are outsourcing to an editor, maybe one from Salt and Sage Books, just saying, we have some good ones, you will need editing in your piece at some point. If you magically do not need editing, please tell me the name of the fairy who you have bribed, because I would like to know their name. Hook a sister up. All right, so it can be really lovely to start your editing process with friends. And especially if you are a brand new writer, like I know when I wrote my first book, the very first thing that I did was I called my sister. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've written a book. Will you read it? And tell me what you think. And she's my sister. Like, she loves me and she is deeply invested in my happiness. And so she read it, she did. And she's actually also pretty darn good at editing. And she gave me some feedback, and it was a little bit shattering to me. She and I have talked about this. I have her blessing to share. But it was really, I had not realized how hard it was going to be to receive critical feedback. And to be very clear, she wasn't saying like, this is bad. She was saying things like, it seems like these 3 chapters kind of just went nowhere. And I'm not really sure what the point of these 3 chapters was. She was right. She was right. I had just like gone on a tangent. And then those chapters like never came into play later. They really did just need to be deleted. But as a very beginning writer, I felt so like, oh, what do you mean I haven't written something that is just like perfect? Oh, it really, like, it genuinely knocked my confidence for a few days. And then when she and I spoke on the phone the next time, she was like, I loved that book. It was so good. I really enjoyed reading it. Like, I want you to write the next one. And I was like, wait a minute. I thought that you hated it and that it was terrible. And she was like, what are you talking about? So that experience really informs a lot of the way that I approach reading and editing for friends, because it was a difficult experience for me and I did not get what she was actually saying. So it can be really lovely to have your friends read your work, because hopefully they are supportive and kind and they care about you. And there's my cat. And hopefully they are gentle with the way that they approach you. And hopefully they understand your sensitivities. And hopefully they can like balance the way that they give that feedback so that it feels very supportive to you. It's also a really good way to establish your own skills as an editor in a low stakes environment. A lot of the people who I have interacted with, instead of being like, oh yeah, sure, I'll edit your piece for you or I'll read it, they were also saying, and will you also read mine, right? So it was a little swappy do. And that can be a much more healthy way to approach it. In my experience, this whole episode is just going to be based on my experience and what I have seen work for the broader writing community that I am a part of. So I think it's advisable to swap with people, because then each of you is getting something out of the relationship and you're not just leaning on your one friend who happens to be well-read, because that could be, if you don't structure it correctly, that could be a path towards the friend feeling resentful or used. And you want to avoid that, right? We want to preserve your friendships and improve your writing simultaneously. I think that friends can also be really helpful. So say that I have written a piece and my friend has written a piece and we swap. And then I give feedback on this piece and they give feedback on mine. And then we swap back. We can then have a conversation as friends, kind of pulled back and say, ooh, the way that you explained this particular comment, like this edit that you made, makes so much sense to me. That felt really supportive. And the friend can then know, aha, okay, that worked really well. Because you don't always know. You might know what works well for you as a writer, like what sort of feedback you would like to receive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to give that sort of feedback in a way that is easily digestible by other people. You want to be sure that you are becoming aware of your own editorial voice and the ways that you naturally edit and the things that work really well for your clientele, and in this case, your friends, and the things that are a little bit trickier for your clientele or your friends. And then you can really refine your own way of giving feedback, and you can also refine the way that you edit when you have that sort of feedback from somebody. As you get into the professional editorial spheres, it can be a little bit harder to get that sort of editorial feedback on your specific style, simply because once you honestly just start editing for people who you don't know, and you might not hear back. They might not want to give you feedback. They might forget about giving you feedback. They might genuinely not know that you want feedback. If you do, please solicit it from them. There are so many different reasons why you might not receive feedback from somebody when you are editing for strangers. And it can be so helpful to really be able to refine your editorial skills with someone who you can talk to, where you can say, did this work? Like, did this make sense? Because I felt like I was really long-winded. I felt like I wasn't totally sure if what I said made sense. And they can then give you the feedback to be like, I really don't know what you meant here, or no, that worked really well. And that is so helpful for refining your own editorial voice and understanding what things resonate with your clientele and which things don't, in the way that you present them. I do also really like that you have a chance to get your work edited too, because it lets you build a little bit of that thick skin. We've talked about this so many times, the idea that writers really need a thick skin, but also to be really thin-skinned. It is the writer contradiction at its core, that we need to be able to receive feedback, and we also need to be able to say, well, this clearly just wasn't the right book for you, for the people who are giving you 1-star reviews. And then also be sensitive enough to look around at humanity and understand and see what the things are that people like what you want to write about, right? The deep human condition. And that requires you to be so sensitive to the world and to the people who you interact with and the animals as well. My cat's like looking at me like, excuse me, don't forget the animals too. So I think it's important practice to be able to receive critique from people who you already have a basis of friendship with. You already know, like I already knew that my sister cared about me deeply. And in getting that feedback, I felt very hurt because I was very hurt. Like I can't underline that enough. It made me feel so like, oh, maybe I'm actually terrible at this. Oh, maybe I'm actually really not a very good writer. But then when we talked, I was like, wait a minute. She cares about me so much, and she would not lie to me about whether or not it's good. And this is also why people say that like family doesn't necessarily make the best beta readers. And I have come to agree with that, with the exception of my sister, because she will tell me very honestly if something works and if something doesn't. And she has come to be one of the most important people in my drafting process for that exact reason. She is the one who I send my alpha drafts to when like I've finished it, but like, ooh, it's messy. Like I haven't even run a spell check on it half the time. And she's the one who can go on and be like, yes, you have got the core of this. Like I can see it needs refinement, but like the one piece that you have missing to really make it good is like this section right here. And I'll be like, whoa, you're totally correct, right? So I deeply trust her. And I was able to get to that trust much quicker because we already had a relationship where we were friends with each other. I mean, we're sisters, but we're friends as well. I like her a whole bunch. I did not necessarily mean for this episode to just be like, love letter to my sister, but truly, she's pretty remarkable. It is also incredibly fun to draft with people who are rooting for your characters. So like my critique partner who I have now, she and I, we work very differently. I am much more of a pantser. She is much more of a plotter. And so the way that our critique sessions intersect, we come to each other in different places at different times. But it is so remarkably fun to be really invested in the characters that she is creating through her whole planning process, that I'm getting to know them before she's even drafted. And because we go through everything together, right? And again, this is just how it works for us. You might find that going through all of your drafting stuff with someone else makes you feel stressed, in which case, don't do it. I actually do not tell her anything about my plot until I am about 5,000 words in, because then I feel like I have the world under my feet. And then I'm like, okay, here's what I know about this story. And then it's exciting for both of us. But I've learned that I can't give information about the story before I have that initial world set, or it just takes the wind right out of my sails and I don't want to write it anymore. So it gives you a chance to understand those sorts of things about yourself. But it is so much fun then, because I love her characters. And then as she's drafting them, and she likes to receive feedback as she goes. So she will send me the chapters as she finishes them. And as I am reading through, I'm like, oh, I love these kids so much. They're so cute, or they're so funny, or, oh, I see what you're doing here because I remember that arc that you're going to give this particular character. Woo. It is so much fun to do that. And you feel this deep sense of, at least I do, this deep sense of connection to the book that you are editing in a way that I normally don't experience unless I'm like obsessed with this novel, right? And I love it. So writing for your friends has that sort of benefit as well. And then you kind of get to the point where, because you're friends, you have these things where you're like, oh, just like in your book in chapter 7, and your friend's like, oh, I remember, right? So it can be a lot of fun. And it is also a really easy way to build out a critique group from the get-go. So if you are a beginning writer, and you find yourself some writing friends, even if you're not a beginning writer, you find yourself some writing friends, and they just sort of naturally evolve into critique groups. These can be wonderful because you have a group of people who is really dedicated, and they're connected by writing, and they all like each other on top of it. I think it is rare to find something where there is just magically no drama, which is what we're going to talk about next. But it is an easy way for you to build that critique group. And I think that critique groups are really, really, really important, to have either a critique partner or a critique group. But somebody out there needs to exist for you and your writing, where you can receive validation when things are really good and you can receive that constructive criticism when things are not working as well as they could be working. I honestly think that finding yourself a critique partner or a critique group is like the number one thing that will boost your writing skills. Like if I could recommend not just one thing, because if I could recommend one thing for all writers, it would be just keep writing. Please just keep writing. Don't give up. Just keep going. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't even have to be every other day. Just write, though. Please don't give up on your writing, especially if it fills something inside of you. Write. Please write. Don't give up on that. You are worth pursuing what you want. But the second thing that I would say is to get yourself a critique partner. It improves your writing, I think, faster than anything else in my experience. And a critique group does the similar thing. And depending on how much time you have, you might find that different sizes of critique groups are a better or a worse fit for you. It depends so much on you as an individual person. But it is really worth finding someone who can read your stuff. And if they happen to be a friend, marvelous. If you do not have any writing friends at all, I would strongly suggest attend local writing events. You'd be surprised how many writers there are just kind of hiding in plain sight. You can often connect with people through your library. I have asked my library more than once, are there any like writing groups that come in here, or does anyone have like set writing times, or are there authors who are coming to read? And you build your community that way. I've also met a lot of people through my local NaNoWriMo group who have become really good friends, and they are focused on writing, right? And so we've become critique partners for each other. And I was part of several critique groups actually that happened around NaNoWriMo because we met, we liked each other, we clicked, we started exchanging our work. The other ways that you can find critique partners and critique groups is by attending conferences. That is how I found my critique partner. We had both entered a first chapter contest, and there was the swap of, does anyone want to trade? Like, hey, will you read mine? And we read each other's, and we were both like, oh, I like the way you edit. Oh, I like the way you write. So we became friends because of that. What else? Facebook groups can be helpful. You can literally just post and be like, hey, I'm looking for a critique partner. I'm sure you could find people. I found someone on Twitter, X, before. You just hunt through hashtags, things along those lines. The tricky bit about finding somebody who you don't already know when they are a stranger is that you simply have no idea how the interaction is going to go. You don't know if they're going to return the stuff on time. You don't have really the same ability to be like, hey, what did you think? Give it to me honest, that you might have with friends. So there are pros and cons to both, but we're specifically talking about friends today. So if you don't yet have a critique group, I would really encourage you to prioritize finding one. I think for me, having critique groups has been one of the most life-changing and skill up-leveling things that I have ever done. Find yourself a critique group or a critique partner. And again, if they're friends, marvelous, lucky you. And they might become friends, honestly, if they're genuinely good critique partners. You might find that they become your friends as well. It's okay if they don't, but you might find that they do. Alrighty, so we've talked about what is so lovely about working with friends. And in a nutshell, it's essentially that you feel more safe with them than you do other people. It is a fairly low stakes environment to really establish your skills and become a better author and become a better editor and become better at receiving feedback in a place that feels safer. There are, of course, things that are very tricky about editing and critiquing for your friends. You might have friends who are very sensitive. They might not be interested in taking criticism about a piece or a character or whatever it happens to be. I have an experience with one particular, this was one of those like we're strangers and we exchanged pieces. And this particular author had, unbeknownst to me, based a character off of her like beloved grandfather who had recently passed away. I did not know this information. Obviously, how could I know? Because we were strangers. And I found that particular character kind of problematic. And so I explained why I felt like they weren't developed very well and that they could really use some additional work on the character development. And she was not happy with that feedback. Understandably. But I did not know, right? I didn't know what was happening. So that was with a stranger. But with friends, you might be aware at that point, be like, oh, I know that she based this off of her grandpa, and I know that she misses him so much. This character is not working, though. How do I give that feedback? And it can be really tempting to just not critique at all and to just say, oh, I love so much that you base your grandpa on that. Like, you base his character on your grandpa, and not say, but he feels really underdeveloped, right? It can be really tempting to do that because you want to preserve the friendship, especially if you know that your friend is like really intensely grieving their grandfather. And again, this is one of the things that you kind of have to weigh as an author and as an editor and as a friend and say, like, is this feedback appropriate for me to give? And if it is, can I give it in a way that is going to be receivable? So I have unintentionally given critique to friends. This was like back in the very, very beginning of when I was starting out, and it was such an important lesson for me to learn. And I'm sad that I had to learn it at my friend's expense, but luckily she was very, very gracious with me about it. Where she asked for a developmental edit, and I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time. Yeah, that's the right way to say that. And so I went through and I was really, really, really focused on line editing, because that was what I had been exposed to through school, is a lot of line editing. And that is what I thought that she meant. And she didn't mean that. And that was my fault, because I went through and I gave her all of this line editing feedback where, like, I went into intense detail about the fact that she had described the bark of the tree incorrectly. If it was going to be an elm, she described it like this, but that is actually more like the bark of a maple, or I don't remember specifics. But it was that level of like super duper nitpicky, which is not actually what she was looking for. And she was incredibly gracious with me. And she was like, wow, you did, like, this is a lot. And it wasn't actually what I was looking for. And I was like, no, I was so mortified. And I also felt silly because I had spent a lot of time doing research about elm tree bark. And so that it was such a good lesson for me. The other concern that you might have is that you are sensitive to feedback. I've had this happen more than once, where I've put out a piece that I have felt particularly tender about, and then to have a friend tear it apart, even if that is specifically what I asked for, even if I was like, tear it apart, I need feedback. And then the friend did that, that would have been, or not would have been, it was, and continues to be sometimes kind of difficult for me. So it can be tricky to receive feedback from anybody across the board, but at least if it's a stranger, you can kind of say, okay, yeah, but like, they don't know me. Like, if they knew me, they might react differently. But then when it's a friend and you're like, oh no, they do know me and they still completely tore this apart, it can be really difficult to reconcile that in yourself, especially if you are, for me, again, in the very beginning stages of your journey, when you just feel tender. And I actually feel tender again at the beginning of every single project. By the time I hit draft, it used to take me to like draft 5 to where I was like, all right, just tear it apart, I'm ready. Now I hit that closer to draft 2 or 3 of a piece where I can be like, all right, I'm disconnected enough from this emotionally to be able to look at it with some more objectivity. And you develop that skill. But like, if people are really unkind, especially my friends, if they're unkind about my story premise, if I share that destroys me to this day. And I think it probably always will, because I'm in my tender space where I need to talk about a project and have it be supported. So that can be tricky if you're sensitive, or if your friends are sensitive. You might have friends who can't take feedback. You might have friends who, when you give feedback to them, they're like, oh yeah, but like, you don't actually know what you're talking about, because this has to be here because of da 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 da. And it can get to a point where you're like, all right, I don't know why I'm giving you feedback. So then it can start to feel like a waste of your time. And that also builds resentment between you and the friend. So that can be tricky. Some of your friends might be better editors than you, like way better editors than you. I've had that experience. And some of your friends might not be as skilled as you are. This is part of the difficulty, is that if you have non-equal editing skills, you can feel like, wow, I spent like 5 hours working on this and gave you incredible feedback. And it seems like you read this 30 minutes before our meeting and just like made 2 comments that said, wow, this is good, right? That can feel so frustrating when it is unequal. And on that same note, friends who don't reciprocate with you can also feel so frustrating when you have spent hours looking at someone's piece and really thinking about it and making suggestions and doing those sorts of edits. It can be so frustrating to then come and have them be like, oh, I just didn't get to your piece yet. And it feels so much to me like, oh, okay, you're not valuing this in the same way that I am. And that can be, you can see how it can turn into, okay, this isn't a good fit anymore. You might also have friends who read totally different genres than you. I recently finished a middle grade novel and sent it out to a bunch of friends for critique. And one friend was like, I don't normally read middle grade, but I will give it a go. But I need you to know in advance that, like, I don't normally read middle grade. And I was like, well, that's fine. I would love to have like feedback from someone who does not know the genre very well. I think that's really valuable. And she actually contacted me about a week later. She was like, I am so sorry. You are a really good writer. And you know I love your writing. And I do know that because she's critiqued other things from me. She's like, I just can't. Something about this genre, I just can't. I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to give you good feedback because I don't like any of it. She's like, it's not what you've written. It's literally just that the main character is 10. And for her, that is just like she just does not enjoy reading middle grade. And that is fine. But when you have friends in the group and you're like, okay, but I have this middle grade, is that friend just like not going to give feedback about that one? And then they feel obligated to read the thing that they don't necessarily enjoy reading. It can become a problem. And same with you. If you are not a romance reader and you have one member of the group who is writing romance, it can be hard for you to give feedback to that, especially when you have additional different tastes. So like if you have strong feelings about strong language, for example, or explicit scenes or scenes with violence in them, things along those lines, it can become really tricky for you to give good feedback around that. Or to, even read it if it's not something that you feel comfortable reading. And you shouldn't have to read things that you don't feel comfortable reading. I want to be really clear with that. So we've gone over why friends are lovely to work with. It's because it's a safe place to really work on your skills. It can be really tricky to work with friends because you want to maintain your friendship and you want to be sensitive to the friend. And sometimes that comes at the cost of being honest about the story. Both ways. So here are the tips that I have found to really make your critique groups and editing specifically for friends. I think it's good advice for critique groups across the board, but specifically when you're editing with your friends, this is what I have found works really well. First, define your terms together. Sit down with your friend and say, all right, when you say, I need you to read this and tell me what you think, what do you actually mean? Is that code for I want you to read this and point out every time that you felt happy? Is it I'm feeling insecure about this and I need you to give me some support? Is it I'm not really feeling this? Can you check if you're also not feeling this? Like, you need to know what the other person means. I find it incredibly valuable to define what beta reading means, what alpha reading means, what line editing means, what dev editing means, developmental, and what proofreading means to you and your specific friend. So you are operating from the same playbook. And that might feel a little over the top, but you would not believe the number of times I have gone back to that document where we defined everything and the friend has said, okay, I really want a line edit. And I'm like, all right, what did we agree that a line edit was? Okay, I know what we're doing now. Here we go. So define your terms together. Define your terms together, especially if it's tricky for you as an author to, in the moment, explain what it is that you want. I feel like that often when I'm sending out my alpha drafts. I'm like, I don't know. I've written it. Like, tell me what you think. I don't really know clearly what sort of feedback I need. I just know that it is out of my hands at this point and I need someone else to put eyes on it. So have those terms defined in advance. I promise you it will save you so much grief. And then in tandem with that, be incredibly clear with what you need if you can. So my current critique partner and I have developed a system where we share our documents via Google Docs, and we always put a little note in a different color up at the top, and we say, this is what I need for this particular piece. And I'll say things like, okay, I've written this piece, but I feel like the action sequence, it just feels kind of muddy to me. Like, I don't know if it actually like makes sense. Can you follow what is happening? Easily. Like if you were just like skimming it, could you be like, oh yes, I understand what's happening? Or like, does someone's sword get thrown and then they magically have it back in their hand? Like, I don't know. I've done what I know how to do. I need help with that specific scene. Or I might say, okay, I've put kissing into this chapter as you suggested, but I hate it. So like, tell me if this actually works or if there's something that I'm missing. Or I might say like, I'm incredibly proud of this particular section that I wrote. And I'll even highlight it sometimes and just say, give me all the love. And my critique partner will go in and be like, this is incredible. This is amazing. Oh my goodness. Look at your wording. Look at your phrasing. And I need that. I'm not asking her to not tell me the truth. Okay. That feels like the big difference to me is I still am trusting her to say, okay, this section that you said you love so much, oh, your prose is so gorgeous, but I did notice a small thing. Like she would still do that. But the clearer that you can be about what you need and the clearer that your partner or partners can be about what they need, the easier the editorial experience is going to be for you and the more satisfying it is going to be for both groups of people. And then if you ever have a situation where you feel like your friend just like completely did not understand what you were asking for, then you can go into the friend and be like, okay, hang on. When you read the way I said this, it seems like you thought this, but what I meant was this. How can I phrase it differently next time? Right? And then you and your friend can have that constructive dialogue. The other thing, this is a subset of things that I think is really important, is to set up really, really clear boundaries. I would really strongly suggest that you start with a trial period. Say you're only going to work together for 5 chapters or for 1 month or for this particular book or whatever it happens to be. And then you can reassess. I know it's hard to then tell your friends like, it's just not working for me, but it's okay for you to do that. And if you have friends where your boundaries are really good between you and the friend, hopefully they would say like, that's okay. I love you anyways. And if you don't have really good friends where you would feel safe doing that, then I don't know, man, maybe go to therapy and talk about how to make better friends. I say that so flippantly. It's been a struggle my whole life. So start yourself with a trial period. Make sure that you're both super on the same page about how long it's going to take, how much you're going to do, how many chapters you're going to read, how many words you're going to read, something along those lines. Be really clear about what you feel comfortable reading. So like for my one friend, she does not want to read middle grade. And that's totally fine. Now I know, but she is my urban fantasy person. When I'm writing my urban fantasy, I send her stuff and she's like, yes, give me more. Be really clear about what works for you as a reader, and then have your friend be really clear with what works for them as well, so that you are not unintentionally putting things that the other person doesn't read. Like if you write exclusively poetry and your friend really doesn't love poetry, maybe they're not going to be a good critique partner, and that is okay. Be really clear about the structure of your critique sessions too. Are you going to primarily do this via comments? Are you going to write a letter at the end? Are you going to make comments and then you meet in person? Are you going to do a video chat? Is it going to be 1 hour of conversation, 3 hours of conversation, 10 hours of conversation? What are you going to do? What is it going to look like? And I would recommend starting small, because you can always add more to it. But once you have committed to like, okay, let's do 5 hours every week. And then if it's not working out, those can be a really painful 5 hours. So I would say start small, but be really clear about how often you'll read. And then be really clear about the sort of feedback that you want. And then also, if you know this about yourself, what sort of feedback you feel comfortable providing. For example, I feel confident enough to proofread my own stuff, but I do not feel confident enough to read someone else's proofreading things, because I then use another proofreader. I hire a proofreader for every piece that I write because my grammar skills are pretty good, but they are not perfect. And the proofreader who I work with, like, has the MLA and Chicago style, like, it is just like in her brain. She understands it in a way that I can only dream of. So I would not be the right critique partner for a friend who really wants proofreading. But I am an amazing developmental editor and I'm an amazing line editor. And so those sorts of feedback I can give. But I would not feel comfortable if a friend was like, yeah, I just really need someone to proofread this. I'd be like, I'm not your girl for that particular one, because I know that my skill set lies elsewhere. And I don't think that there's any shame in that or in knowing that. And then also be really clear the sort of feedback that you want. Like, by the same token, if your friend is incredibly good at proofreading, but you really need like developmental editing and that is not her wheelhouse or their wheelhouse or his wheelhouse, then find someone else. And that's okay too. But understand what it is that you need. And then can your friend provide it? And vice versa, what your friend needs, and can you provide that reasonably? And then the last, but I think probably the most important thing to establish with your friend, if you want to become critique partners or you want to edit each other's stuff, is what is your plan of repair if one of you is hurt? And I know that this sounds like a lot to lay out in advance, but goodness, I think it's so important. Lay out that plan of repair so that you know what to do if you feel hurt. If your friend says something like, this is just crap, I really don't like anything that you're writing, I hate this character, and that hurts your feelings, you should have a plan in place where you can say, hey, at our next meeting, like, I need to talk about some stuff you said that hurt my feelings. And then you can say, it really hurt my feelings when you said you hated this character and he sucks. Because I'm working really hard to make him a likable character. He's going from gray to better. Like, we have this redemption arc happening. And I felt like the way that you phrased that was kind of dismissive. And then the friend can say, you know what, you're totally right, I'm really sorry. I will do better about that in the future. I mean, hopefully that's what your friend would say and how they would respond. But this is why I think it's important to lay out some sort of a repair outline where you can say, like, it's probable that we are going to unintentionally hurt each other's feelings. When that happens, what do we do? Maybe I buy you dinner that night. Maybe I apologize sincerely. Maybe I don't know, record a funny TikTok to a silly song and I post that as my apology video. Something like that, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a huge deal either. You can literally just say, our plan for this is to reply back to the person and be like, ooh, this feels a little like sizzly to my heart. Like, are you meaning it like, and then I will restate what I think that they mean. And then they have the opportunity to come back in and clarify what they're saying and whether or not they meant it to be sizzly. Often they don't. So, and if they do, then, you know, again, maybe they're not a super good fit for you as a critique partner, and that's okay. Alrighty. Well, I hope that has been helpful. Set yourself some boundaries with your friends and share your writing around. I think it's important to do that. And if you honestly feel like writing with friends or around friends is not a good fit for you, then I think that's great too. I actually have my own personal boundary that unless somebody is willing to swap chapters with me, I don't edit for free, basically, because my writing and editorial time has become very precious to me in the way that my life is currently structured. I just don't have enough of it. And so I need to make sure that I am prioritizing my own creative process. So I don't read for friends or family members or anybody who's like, hey, I have this thing, would you be willing to look at it? And my response is always, if you're willing to look at something of mine. And often they are, but sometimes they're like, oh, no, that wasn't really what I was hoping for. Then I'm like, okay, then I'm sorry, I really genuinely don't have time. And it's not, for me anyway, it's not a hateful thing. I truly do not have the spare time to give to something that doesn't have a reciprocal benefit for my own writing time. And I feel like as I'm saying that sounds really selfish, but at a certain point, you do kind of have to be selfish with your creative energy, or the things that you want to write end up taking a back seat. And that's not fair to you or to your writing or to your friends. Honestly, if they're really rooting for you, they wouldn't want you to do that either. So, okay, that is the end of this podcast, and I cannot think of how to end it. So we're simply going to end it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a lovely day or night or whatever, and that you have a nice time critiquing for your friends. Okay, bye.
This has been Rough Drafts Welcome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Got any questions? We would love to hear them. Got a complaint? We'll hear it too.
Yep. Leave us a 5-star review. Pretty please, and thank you. And if you want to book with Salt and Sage Books or learn anything else about what we do, or if you want to work with us or take our courses or blah, 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 you can find us at www.saltandsagebooks.com. And and we're all over social media too.
We sure are.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.